Today's reading is from Rays of the One Light, weekly commentary on the Bible and Bhagavad Gita. This week's reading is The Best Way to Worship. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. In chapter 4 of the Gospel of St. John, the woman of Samaria asks Jesus, "What is the best place to worship?" This question might be expanded to include, what is the best church? What is the best religion? Is it important to go on pilgrimage to holy shrines? What is the best ritual? What is the best mantra or prayer? Jesus cut across all such questioning with his reply. The hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeketh such to worship him. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. It was not that outer considerations of place, church, ritual, etc. are irrelevant. Each person should find those practices and observances which are compatible with his own nature, one might say, with his own vibration. Not everyone's natural path is the same. God sent different religions into the world to satisfy different human needs. The overarching concern, however, considering that the goal is to find God, is to include it in one's worship daily, inner communion with the Lord. God is silence. He must be sought, therefore, in inner silence. God is absolute love. He must be sought, therefore, in the silence of love. God is spirit, and thus immaterial. He must be sought, above all, in the expanding peace of deep meditation. Thus, the Bhagavad Gita states in the 6th chapter, sequestered should he sit, steadfastly meditating, solitary, his thoughts controlled, his passions laid away, from every craving for possessions freed. Wherever you are, whatever your outward beliefs and observances, seek God in the silence of your own soul. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Oh, oh, oh.
Good morning, great souls. We have had a celebration of Swami Kriyananda's life here. That's why the picture is up here, in case anybody out here doesn't know who it is. Of course, Swami was a great disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda. And one of the things that impressed me the most was how he was able to bring his inner life out into the world and share it with everybody. And I've had the fortune of reading a book over the last month or so. It's called The Book of Joy. I've got it over here. It's by two other great disciples, the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. And it basically is about their life and how they've taken their spiritual practices and brought them out into life to deal with the tragedies that have happened in their life in general. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that because it's true with all of us. I mean, we all have an inner life. We're all trying to live that life outward in a way that works for everybody. And there were a couple principles that they outlined in the book that I thought I'd share with you. And one of the main ones was simply acceptance. acceptance of life as it is, and just allow life to come at it at its own terms, and that we don't rail against it, thinking that it should be other than it is. One of the main issues with people now today is stress. And what does stress come from? Stress comes from the fact that we want life to be different than what it is. And we get anxious, and we get depressed, and we go through all kinds of suffering reacting to circumstances around us because we think they should be different. And the main issue, the main tactic of meditation, of going deep inside, is to accept life as it comes because it comes from God. And it sounds like an easy practice, but everybody who meditates know it takes a lot of self-discipline to go inside and quiet the mind and be steady inside and go deep. And then when you come out, to come out and live your life so you're not anxious, so you can see God in everything that comes to you. This country especially has a real hard time doing that. Most people do have a hard time doing that. We have a huge drug addiction problem in this country because people can't accept life as it is. It has to be different. There has to be something else out there that's outside myself that's going to make me happy, but I can't find it, and then people get depressed. And it destroys their life. One of the goals of meditation is, when we're taught to meditate, when you pursue a goal, when you pursue your deep meditation, you want to try to go deep, but you're not really specific about your goal. And it's a lesson that we need to learn outwardly in life as well. When we go after a goal in life, you need to be flexible. If you're really fixed on the outcome of how it's going to turn out, God can't help you. And many times when we go toward a goal that we think is the right thing to do, God may take us in 1,000 different directions and finally lead us to where something far greater than what even we were seeking. We read a story about the life of Rajarsi Janakananda, and in that there's a story of Yogananda going to India in 1935. And he was trying to establish a center in India, in Calcutta. And he went to all these places, and every time he felt guided to do that God was telling him to do this. And he kept doing this and this and this, and it kept failing, and he kept moving on and moving on and moving on. And finally, God gave him the school in Ranchi. And Yogananda said, I finally realized that the school in Ranchi totally fixed the work in India. It totally changed everything for him. And he said, I was trying to be specific in my goal to form a center in Calcutta. God wanted to give me something else. So it's something that happens even to a master, that, we need to, be guided by our intuition, to be guided in our life. But don't be too specific, You may want a Volkswagen, God may want to give you a Cadillac. You can let him do that. You need to take the stress out of your life. It takes a while. Life is unpredictable. It's a challenge. You never know exactly what's going to happen to you. I remember a story about a Japanese prisoner he was on an island in one of the Pacific Islands in a concentration camp and prison camp. And he said he missed it after the war was over. It was torture. He was by himself a lot of the time, but he said he'd never felt so close to God. But the other part of it was, you have to accept your reality for what it is. If you live in anger and hate and fear, you can't commune with God. God can't come through you. Even in circumstances like this, there's a story in the book that they bring up of a woman who was in a concentration camp in Germany. And she said, the people who made it through were the people that could really accept what was happening to them. Because when you accept, you release your hold on the past, and you begin to see what my next step is. Okay, what's the next thing? She was even thrown into a pile of dead bodies. And she said she was curious about, okay, what's going to happen next? You know, it was like, I just can't imagine living in that kind of a horror and going through that. But again, she said, you have to accept what life gives you. You know, it's sure the ego lives in the senses, and it's going to try to give you everything else. But it's a discipline to live on a spiritual path. It's a discipline to live a spiritual life. But we got to deal with it. In the book, the other big thing that they talked about in their lives, both the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, was forgiveness. Desmond Tutu talked of apartheid in South Africa, and he said there was a Truth and Reconciliation Committee set up to try to bring the country together. And there was this one lady, he said, who was watching TV, watched the death of her son, watched him get pulled over into a pile of dead bodies. And during the Truth and Reconciliation thing, she came to that, and she told this story. And she forgave the person who killed her son. And she said, her reasoning was, what good is it going to do for this person to go to jail? You know, it's just going to continue the hatred and the violence that caused this to happen in the first place. And she went over and gave the person a hug and said, I forgive you for what you've done. The other aspect of this, there's another story, a pretty famous story about when they had the riots in Ireland, about a British soldier who shot a rubber bullet at a kid who was about 10 years old, hit him in the forehead and blinded him for life. Well, the boy ended up growing up, getting married, having a couple kids, but he contacted that soldier later on in his life because he wanted to forgive him. And they became very, very close friends. But one thing that helps, I think, us to realize that in the process of forgiveness was something the Dalai Lama said. The Dalai Lama got a letter from a 16-year-old boy and said, look what's happened to you. You've lost your home, your country, you've been kicked out. And don't you hate these people who have done this? And the Dalai Lama responded and said, I don't hate them. He said, I work and do everything I can to right the wrongs that have been done, but you can't hate them. And like he said, you can forgive them, he said, because the law of karma is exacting. Everything you get put out will come back to you. It's the law. You can't escape it. That's how it works. So these people in China that have done these horrible things to him, he feels compassion for them because it will come back to him. I mean, China has karma to pay for doing that. And we may not be, aware of it right away. It may be something that comes back to us. But again, this isn't our dream. It's God's dream. We're playing a part in it. And we have to play our part, what God gives us. We have to accept that. And it doesn't mean that you don't work for goodness, that you don't strive to do the right thing. And like the Dalai Lama said, he says, you don't forgive and forget. You forget on a personal level, yes, you try to forgive those that harm you, but on a greater evil like that, you fight back. You do everything you can to destroy the evil in your life. But again, you don't hate the people. We're all in this together, and we're all trying to do the right thing. I mean, we don't obviously make it all the time. But it's just something we need to do. Master said, bliss consciousness arises where there's the severing of identification and seeing God as the doer. And for a lot of us, severing of identification means we cut the ties with the reactive process that's making us go down the wrong path. when we can cut those ties and realize, and again, just rest in God. I mean, it is the practice of meditation. Acceptance is the practice of meditation taken out into daily life. And when we can cut those ties, joy will come to us. It is our home. It is what we have. But we just have to be aware of that. And it is a life of, it's a life of self-discipline. Because a lot of people think forgiveness is a sign of weakness. And the Dalai Lama talked about that in his book too. He said, a lot of people think that what he's doing, forgiveness, is a sign of weakness. And he says, that's the exact opposite. It is a sign of incredible strength. I mean, it's real easy to get mad and strike back at somebody who does wrong to you. I mean, it's your natural reaction. It's what the ego puts out. But to forgive them, that's huge. That's God coming through you. And he works through channels. I mean, it's God's life. We are in an ascending yuga, and things are going to get better and better and better. But we have to realize that. We have to turn over the reins to God and do the best we can. That's all you can do, is do the best you can. And you will come out right at the end. Brother Bhaktananda, who was a monk down at SRF, somebody asked him what humility was. And he said, true humility is exact correspondence with reality. And I thought about that for a minute, and I've thought about that a lot, actually. And I think that's true acceptance of what comes to you, is true humility. Because what else can you do but the best you can? That's the power of meditation. It's the power of self-realization. Because I think the time has come for, on this whole entire planet, that, you're not going to get it out of a book. You've got to use it. You've got to find out for yourself. Yogananda was huge on that. He said, why let anybody tell you what religion is? Why let anybody tell you how you should be living your life? Find out for yourself. The truths are out there. He gave us Kriya Yoga to do that. Like he said, it works like mathematics. It cannot fail. I mean, that's a pretty good promise. So what we need to do is keep our sadhana strong, do the best we can. That's all you can do, is do the best you can. And we will succeed. I want to read from Whispers from Eternity. This is one of my favorite readings in Whispers, and it's basically about us being centered in ourselves and being strong in ourselves.
What number is it?
And it's number 43, and it's called Make Me a Lion of Thy All-Conquering Wisdom. I, a lion cub of Divine Mother, found myself thrown into life among the sheep of human frailties, of fear, failure, and disease. Living long among them, I learned to bleat with weakness, forgetting my lion nature and its roars, which could frighten away all petty, pestering sorrows. O lion of realization, thou didst drag me away from those bleating sheep to the mirror-smooth waters of meditation. There did thou cry, gaze. But I held my eyes tightly shut, bleeding with fear. The roar of wisdom then reverberated throughout my body. Thou madest me, by hard shaking and spiritual urging, open my eyes, and lo, in the crystal pool of my inner peace, I saw my features to be even as thy own. Now I know myself as a lion of cosmic power. I will bleat no more with fear, weakness, and suffering, for I roar now with vibrant, almighty power. I bound through the forests of all experiences, seizing little creatures of vexing worries, timid fears, and wild hyenas of disbelief, devouring them ruthlessly. O lion of immortality, roar through me thy all-conquering power of wisdom.